Well, with just a little less than an hour left, I would like to move us into the final category and see where we landed in the levels of support for that, for the D group. And then we can, continue with any wording changes, and then we can wrap up with some other thoughts and comments about the document. So I'm sharing screen one more time for the D group. This is enforcement strategies or ideas. And see once again, there's only 5 recommendations here, and most of these got a high level of support with a lot of notable concern for D1 around the law enforcement notion. So I'm going to just show you again. So again, these were in the order of ranking from the highest level of support to the lowest. And so you can see D1, we're going to be talking about this shortly. There was a lot of confusion or a lot of concern around the way this comment was, or idea was recorded. So let's have a conversation about these. I can leave this up. Looking at the chat coming through. Okay, anybody want to speak up for this set of strategies, the enforcement ones? Yeah, go ahead, Amelia.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, this D1, as to whether having more law enforcement in parks or in any community is considered a good or bad thing. There was a recent news article that studied the question in the Latino community, and it was pretty clearly split that the younger people felt that having more cops around made them feel less safe because they perceived it as a risk to their safety. They might get shot if they're mistaken for a lawbreaker. Whereas for older people, we like having cops around because there are a lot of sketchy lawbreakers around who threaten our safety. So this is a very interesting and complex thing, and I'm sure the public safety department in the park district is very well trained on how to not appear menacing to young people of color and communities, young people in general. This is an anecdote. I grew up in Los Angeles when Police Chief William Parker instituted what was called proactive policing, which meant that if you were a teenage hippie, you would be harassed on the street when you were just walking down, minding your own business by cops. So I get it that this could be a problem. Nonetheless, this is a dangerous time we're living in, and it's very important to strike the right note here. Thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to get my microphone back on. Luana, go ahead.
So for D, my concern is it only said law enforcement. There's a lot of volunteer patrols at the East Bay Regional Park, be it mounted or on bikes. And I think we need to consider the impact of those groups too. And for any increased enforcement presence, because I did vote for it. But as far as we consider what training is happening with the volunteer patrols, you can even include park rangers here and law enforcement, that they're all having anti-bias training, they're having diversity training, they're having training how to interact with different people who speak languages. So just as far as having the appropriate training there so that there's that increased enforcement. And then also, if you are doing increased enforcement at different parks and there's more of a presence and some type of public awareness campaign as far as why the cops are there and what they're doing. Because like, for example, over in Fremont, you'll see a lot more park and police at Quarry Lakes and other stuff. And, there's been a few more break-ins, but just as far as you're seeing that increased presence, but there is some knowledge about like why what's happening. So I think anything we have to do that has to be with education and then also monitoring. So if there's increased enforcement, I'd like to see some type of monitoring component to see if there is an impact as on different groups that are actually receiving citations. So those are just my comments.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Luana, for lifting those comments up. Just in the order that the hands are showing, Morris, then Gary, and Jim, David, and Norman. Yeah. Go ahead, Morris.
Yeah, to say consider the impression that might be got, or that police might make some park users uncomfortable, to consider that in ways that Luana suggested. The park department is already doing these kinds of trainings for their officers and their rangers. Considering that, it's not the same as saying defund the police or abolish the police, or let's have no law enforcement, or let's not concentrate police presence where there's more crime. It's not saying that at all. It's just saying that when those things are necessary, you have to make sure that it's done in a way that doesn't make people uncomfortable and feel like they can't come to the parks because they might get mistaken for an intruder or for somebody else and get arrested unfairly. And actually there was an interesting point raised about the fact that it's not just the officers, it's also the rangers, and it's also the mounted patrol. And I don't know to what extent those groups get the training that they should. I know in the Sierra Club there was a big national issue raised about the fact that volunteers were in important positions, and in some cases were harassing staff members and making them incredibly uncomfortable, both in racist and sexist ways. There was even one complaint by a staff member of rape by a long valued volunteer. And so, to the extent that volunteers are stepping into those positions, then, they have to be trained as well. And the Sierra Club is grappling with that now and working on it, and in a good way. They're taking up that issue. In the same way, we want to make sure that everybody who represents the park district, from officers to rangers to volunteers, knows how to do it in a way that encourages people to participate in the parks and doesn't make them feel like they don't belong. And so considering that is not the same as saying, there shouldn't be enforcement, or we shouldn't make sure that people are safe. It's saying just consider the flip coin of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Morris. I want to pull rank a little bit and ask Lieutenant Phelps to maybe step in real quickly before the others comment, just to give perspective from the district safety staff. So Lieutenant Phelps, do you want to comment?
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I've been loosely monitoring the conversations as I'm working on time cards and revising manuals and things. This certainly was a topic that sparked my interest, and I was actually very surprised just how effectively and intelligently you guys were communicating about that. And I would just like to chime in and agree with most of what was said, that law enforcement across the nation is going through a paradigm shift, or has already undergone a paradigm shift. And we've become a much more very kinder and gentler opposition to patrons in the community and the parks. And we take everything with a grain of salt. By no means is the parks any safer now than they were 4 or 5 years ago. In fact, I would probably expect that they're a little bit more dangerous based on the amount of paradigm shift. I think it is very important that enforcement does occur. Amelia, of all people, know that we would love to have more parks police officers. Right now, we're very understaffed, so I don't think necessarily any parks in the regional park district will be overserved by uniformed law enforcement at this time. And we do staff our patrols in areas where crime is more prevalent. I'll take questions on that. I see a hand up from Helen.
Yeah. Well, we've got a few hands coming up, and thanks for being here, Lieutenant Phelps. So if there is something that folks would like to comment or ask about, I'm just going to call on you as I see the hands in my screen. So it's Gary, then Jim, David, Norman, and then Amelia. So go ahead.
My hand is up. I can't get the chat thing to work. But...
Okay. Hi, Helen. Okay. All right. We'll put you in. Go ahead, Gary, and then if everybody's okay, we'll put Helen in next. Go ahead.
Just a slight change of subject while I have a chance. On D4, blocking off bootleg trails, there's another consideration. Mostly that's a necessary thing to do, but there are some bootleg trails that have been created for good reasons and perhaps should be incorporated into the park's trail system. I know of one bootleg trail that was created for safety reasons to allow equestrians to bypass a very crowded park entrance. So I'd like to see some consideration there. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Okay. Helen, I'm going to allow you to jump in. We haven't heard from you yet today, so go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to say that I think enforcement is a really important issue. And I hear the points that are being made, the kinder and gentler version and so forth. And I think enforcement, I agree with the points that have been made that enforcement can and should be carried out by not only staff, uniformed police, et cetera, but it can also be done by volunteers and staff of the park district. I do think, for example, I'd just like to mention, we haven't really talked about this, but it is a trails issue, and that is the use of e-bikes. And e-bikes, the policy at the park district is great on paper vis-a-vis e-bikes, i.e., it basically bans the use of e-bikes except on certain regional paved trails like the Iron Horse Trail. The problem, but when you go hiking in the parks, and recently I've done, a bit of hiking there, you do see a lot of e-bikes out there. They seem to be gaining in popularity for understandable reasons. So I just think, and if there were signs, this is where signage is really important. Signs saying, e-bikes are not allowed on natural surface trails or narrow trails or however you want to put it. I also think I hear Gary's point about their bootleg trails that have been created for a safety purpose, but I would be willing to guess dollars to donuts that most of them are just, accidental use. And then on those bootleg trails that are not recognized trails by the park district, there very infrequently is there a little sign saying, this is with the ban sign, saying you can't use that trail. So I think a lot more signage. I think there are ways to do enforcement short of, the traditional hard-nosed, uniformed writing out a ticket kind of thing. So anyway, that's thank you for allowing me to speak.
Sure. Yeah. All right. See, Norman, then Jim, and then Amelia. So Norman.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that I think one of the aspects of this is that, and I don't know whether the Park District Police do this, but really going into the communities, particularly communities of color, and interacting and engaging them to and explaining and showing how they had the anti-bias training and they've taken the other types of training to help deflect any possible concerns that way as best they can. And that may be an approach that if they don't do it already, they should try to do, because the examples in the past where police departments have done that, there's a much greater receptivity among communities to the police presence than police forces that don't do that.
Okay.
And you do.
Go ahead, Dave.
attend events in the communities as they arise. Our problem with the two counties is there are so many communities, whereas municipalities don't quite have the expanded borders that we do have. But for instance, there's two occasions this October, we're going to do a trunk or treat in the Alameda County area. Specifically, do we go into groups and talk about bicycle etiquette and trail etiquette? Those usually don't come up, but that's a particularly good idea, is to try and have those discussions in the community events that we do attend. We do a bunch of things for National Night Out in August. We do a bunch of stuff for the holidays in December. A lot of the wellness walks and all those things that have now reappeared since COVID restrictions have been lessened a little bit. But thank you for that recommendation, Norman. I would like to try and invoke those conversations to occur at those community event meetings that we attend.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant Phelps. Jim, Amelia?
Thanks, Lou. So I guess the question is enforcement of what? And I think we're really talking here about unauthorized use, trails set up for a certain thing, or it's multi-use or dual use or single use. And I just want to encourage there are other things to looking towards Officer Phelps who may be 30 miles away, and is this a big deal? And how does they find an issue in the middle of the trail somewhere if you don't have a GPS? And even if you do, I think the problem of working on trails, and there's hundreds of them, is that none of them can be monitored and enforced at any one time. It's just, so why are we expecting people to do the impossible? And volunteers have a big role, but they have a limited ability too. So to cut to the chase, other places are using passive trail methods. These can include steps. These can include how water bars are put in, how I think at Walnut Creek, they use stones in certain places where it's safe for a certain use and not safe for another, or it's not safe for multi-use on a narrow trail. So if we're to have a rational trail policy where everybody knows what the rules are and you know what you can expect on a certain trail, those are passive methods, and includes for hikers too, includes for on-foot users. I mean, I will admit I sometimes tempt to do a shortcut, but if a simple fence is there, and I know it doesn't discourage anybody, so there are passive methods. I just want to say that that's not included in the enforcement, and I think it's a thing that's been useful elsewhere and probably realistic in some cases. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Okay, Amelia, you're up.
Thank you. Just briefly, I'd like to address some of the implications a couple of speakers have raised that we volunteer trail safety patrol volunteers are less than professional and haven't had adequate anti-bias training. First of all, our organization is very strongly disciplined. Lieutenant Phelps, I hope, can back me up on this. We've never been accused of any wrongdoing in our, 30-year history. We have regular annual all-day trainings at the county sheriff's law enforcement auditorium, and we meet with the police liaison officers and typically lieutenants and sometimes even the police chief once a month to have training on current conditions in the park. We are trained to be welcoming to all park users. Our job is to observe, educate, and report. We're not out there to boss people around or to make anyone feel intimidated. And finally, of course, we are a diverse group. Amongst the mounted patrol, we have African Americans, a Native American of my acquaintance, and Latino, white, and Asian American patrollers, and that is also the case in the hiking patrol, of which I am a member. So thank you. And Lieutenant Phelps, am I right? Thanks.
Thank you, Amelia. Yeah, I can back up on that. We have a vast array of various volunteers, and just like police officers, if somebody has an issue with the way they're treated, they're encouraged to call and complain, and it is investigated. And on some rare circumstances, we've removed volunteers, patrollers, based on the interactions with the public that would be considered inappropriate. And those are dealt with swiftly and justly.
But if I could, I just want to jump in here real quick, and I just want to, I appreciate the conversation, but I also don't want us to get too sidetracked in that there was no accusation anywhere in here that, you know, certainly not our police or our volunteers or anybody else operates in a sort of biased manner. I think the suggestion for anti-bias training is good, and certainly there's a lot of initiatives that are going on about that at the Park District right now. But I think the gist of the question of the conversation is sort of, you know, how much should we be relying on enforcement versus other techniques when it comes to trail conflicts and other things? I think Jim said it well, is that, you know, expecting enforcement to do everything is just probably not viable. And as Lieutenant Phelps mentioned, you know, short-staffed and increasing park usage, you know, really requires them to prioritize, you know, where their enforcement, you know, occurs. And we can rely on volunteers to a certain extent, but, you know, enforcement is so that was kind of just to the conversation, is just, you know, how much should enforcement be the priority versus, you know, some of these other techniques that we've been discussing. So I don't want to make people feel that they need to defend volunteer trail safety patrol or anybody else in terms of how they've operated. I think we've all been blessed with good experiences.
Good. Thanks, Brian. Simone, you had your hand up. Are you reconsidering?
I think maybe I was just going to speak to Brian's point, just that, you know, just because I think that it's important to consider that, you know, every group has been able to say their piece about what impacts them in the park. And this is a recommendation coming out of groups that have, you know, have felt marginalized. And it's something that I think is important. We've included other recommendations to enhance safety for equestrians, perhaps for bicyclists. And I think that this is a recommendation that we should, you know, that should stand. So,
great.
Or it could be improved by like a little bit more clarity. So,
yeah. All right. Great. Well, that brings us to checking out some language modifications that have been suggested. So for our last group of polling, Brian, if you don't mind.
Yeah, we just have a couple of these, so this should be quick. So we'll launch this first one.
All right, D2. Yeah, communicate penalties regarding citation and fees for illegal trail usage with signage, advertising, education to make equitable and welcoming for new trail users, and clear signage also needed for conviction in the legal system. So the proposed change to that, communicate what penalties are for illegal trail usage with signage, advertising, and education. So just a sort of a simpler version.
And again, this was a PAC suggestion. We just thought it was kind of a poor sentence the way it was, and we were just trying to clean it up a little bit.
Simplify it, okay. So go ahead and indicate A or B, original language or the proposed change. You know, and it's fine. I think we will substitute the language that gets the plurality of votes, but we'll also indicate, especially, you know, that there was, you know, the scoring for these as well.
So yeah, so B gets 65% there.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on to D4. This is the second to last.
Okay, block off bootleg trails, restore damage, conduct enforcement against users of these trails. And that's the original language. Block off bootleg trails, restore damaged areas, conduct enforcement against users of these illegal trails. And so a couple of little wording changes there.
Okay, I think we got most everybody tonight. So again, B got the plurality 63%.
Okay. And our
final one.
Provide additional resources necessary to achieve greater enforcement. And the substitute language is just ensure adequate resources for enforcement.
I guess I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I really did like Jim's suggestion of, and it was not included in any of the recommendations. I'm not sure if it would go in management or in this enforcement, but using different passive management techniques to help enforce, you know, uses of the trail. I guess if I would be in favor of adding a recommendation like that to this report.
Could we, whether it's Jim or Simone, maybe capture that in the chat just so.
I'd second her motion if that's a motion.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to end this poll. Got full responses there. So 70% ensure adequate resources for enforcement.
Okay.
And provide additional resources.
Okay. That was our last of the language changes, I believe. So great. So in addition to, and thank you all for walking through those with us and taking a look at the whole palette of, or menu of recommendations and ideas that came out of the group. I think it generated a lot of really great discussion, you know, unpacking the ideas and asking questions about what lay behind them, what was the intention of the idea, and what was the nature of people's comfort level or discomfort level with those ideas. We really have been wanting to have that kind of conversation in this group, and I recognize that for many of you, that was something that you've been wanting to participate in for a while. So I think this was really productive. So what our intention from today is to take the input. We didn't cover all of the edits to the document that were suggested. There were some that were really easy to make. Some of you spotted some just typos or things out of order and made those edits. So our process from here is to feed back to you a track change version of the report for you to look at one more round of those, and give you a couple of weeks to digest that, and come back, I think, late November or December, depending on schedules, to have a celebration around the final report. So Brian, did you want to chime in here?
Well, I was just going to say, I think when the management strategies section was put up, I think Norman made the comment, and Pam as well, and I think some others, that there was, you know, I think Amelia made the comment that this is where the rubber hits the natural surface trail. I think we kind of came into this process and, okay, how do we look at, you know, best, you know, expanding, constructing new natural surface trails and land bank properties, full well knowing that existing parklands would be part of the conversation, and there's lots of other things that come up. And I think we've come to a recognition that, you know, management strategies are a real sort of core part of this conversation. And we've had conversations around, you know, different possible pilot projects or management strategies that could be implemented in different places. So I don't necessarily have a suggestion or a proposal right now, but I just want to acknowledge that I agree with Norman that you know, some additional review and discussion of some of those is probably warranted. And, you know, whether it's this full group or a subset, you know, that we dive into those management strategies, and that we're all sort of collectively on board with some of those, because I think those are, you know, it's for us to build anything is takes a long time and permitting and everything else, but that recognizing that there's certain things that we could possibly do to provide a better user experience for everybody is something that we want to definitely take a look at. And so we want to make sure that we have space to continue to have those conversations. So we'll continue to think about that and how we do it.
Thanks, Brian. I see a couple of hands. I just wanted to just tack on here as well. I was trying to frame at the beginning of today's session the notion that this group has had the dialogue that was envisioned by bringing the different stakeholder and user groups together. We've documented those conversations, and we've tried to pull out some of those, the early part of the document, some goals that seem to be some overarching themes and desires across user groups for experiencing the parks. We had some issues that we highlighted. I know there's been some suggested edits to those as well. But just in terms of framing the work of the group, I think we have succeeded in having those dialogues and lifting up some of those goals and issues and some potential strategies. And we are going to report on the level of support for each of those ideas and strategies, as we mentioned, along with some of the comments that you've made to help explain your level of support. So I think all of that as a package together communicates a lot of rich dialogue and I think a willingness to consider some new ideas and some new strategies. And even though some of those management ideas didn't get or got some mixed support, I think that's the conversation around it was just as useful as the conclusion. So I see 3 hands, folks that we've been hearing a lot from. I want to encourage those of you who haven't spoken up today. If you have something to share, we'd love to hear from as many different people today as possible. See how you're feeling on this. So I see Morris, and then Adele, and then Norman. So Morris.
There we go.
There you go.
I had 2 comments. I was hoping I would be first because I've forgotten what one of them was. But the main one was that, I saw that 19 people participated in the poll, and there was something like 32 in the group. And maybe the other 13 were all park staff who didn't feel like they should vote. But I had the impression that a significant number of people didn't respond to the survey. And it seems to me their voices are important. And it's unfortunate that unless all those other 13 were all park staff, that somehow they should be given an impetus to speak up, not just commenting in the meeting here, but also in general, or somehow have input into the final document that they've absented themselves from. And the other thing was that I know that Scott had submitted some comments that probably will show up in the comments section, but weren't addressed in the meeting. He suggested there should be a separate portion of the poll besides A, B, and C, and D, which just stressed the importance of, it said that our group was united in thinking that, number one, land bank properties that were purchased for the purpose of being new parklands in areas where the district has expanded to, number one, should be opened and there should be trails in them. And that should be a priority for the park district going forward. We're considering the aspects of those things, but we should also make a definitive statement that that's a really important thing for the district to concentrate on. That, continuing on the timeline of 15 miles of trails opened in 25 years is just unacceptable, and it's not really serving the public that the park district is supposed to represent. So, I hope there's a way to include that recommendation, even if it is in a separate section of the poll, that's something that, that's why a lot of us joined this group, was to facilitate that happening in the best possible way. And it shouldn't be a thing of, well, maybe we do it and maybe we don't. That should not be a consideration going forward, and we should make that clear to the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, Adela, and then Norman, Joseph, and Amelia. Go ahead.
Thank you. In just a comment to Morris, the PAC representatives did not participate in the poll because we had so many issues with the wording of the question of the items. So, but as you saw, our comments are incorporated through our comments on the document. The other thing is just on the overall document, a couple comments that we had that I wanted to bring up and make sure so that folks could say if they agreed or not. One was just at the very beginning, it lists the working group members. And even though in the introduction, it lists the various organizations, we thought that the organizations that people are representing should appear next to their name. So that was one comment that we provided. And then the other question that I had was how, the scorecard was included as an appendix to the document. And my question is, how is that going to be addressed in the report? Will there be a section talking about the scoring summary?
Yes, definitely. I think it's part and parcel of the process. And so, yeah, it's our intention to include it. I think I mentioned before, we definitely want to memorialize all of the work that's been done, and especially provide that transparency around the recommendations. And so yes, that will be included.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Norman, then Joseph.
Yeah, first off, I actually agree with Morris on his first point about the limited number of people who did actually participate in the original polling. I would hope, I don't know if there's a way to see if the others could participate. It would be good to get everybody or as many as we could. Secondly, I do have to say that it's not just 15 miles. There's been a lot of fire roads opened up and ranch roads in parks that have been opened up. So it's a misnomer to say that only 15 miles of trails have been opened up over the past years. Lastly, but more importantly, I just have a process question. So what happens next? Are we to meet and then things go to the PAC, then to the board ops committee, then to the board, or what's the process next here? And is there going to be an opportunity for us to actually maybe, it's always great to celebrate. I love celebrating, but maybe have us sit down and try to noodle through some of these more not pressing, but difficult issues as a group.
Right. Process question is great. It's going to turn to Devin or Brian to articulate that, as part of the end of the meeting. So I don't know if you want to chime in now, or if you want to, let's save that. Norman, definitely want to make sure that we walk away with a clear sense of what's going next. See, Joseph, and then Amelia, and then Scott, and then Kathy. Joseph. Got to put on the headset. There you go. Can't hear you quite yet there, Joseph.
Yeah.
There you go.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
We got you. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Been having headphone issues. So first, I just wanted to say regarding the land bank, which I think is one of the most important aspects of what we discussed over the last 12 months. I too am in favor of expanding or using the resources from the bank, but I believe what's required in order to do that well, so that we can optimize it, is to make sure that we absolutely have a coalition of the willing, a group of people who want to do this, who have the skills to do it. And we can even use traditional marketing aspects to kind of let an audience know that we want to know about this, that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to take advantage of designing trails, maintaining trails, getting involved in the East Bay Regional Parks, And I believe we'd get a lot of people who would want to help do that, especially if we frame it as just a real focused land bank trail access opening for 3, 5 to 10 years. So I just want to make sure we think about how to advertise the fact that we have this bank and that we're willing to use it. Secondly, I'd like to say that I was thrilled that we were borrowing from best practices from other trail management entities, and that we're willing to listen to other folks who've done this well, even if they're from out of state, specifically around trail etiquette and trail scheduling. And lastly, I really enjoyed the committee. I thought people really showed up in a positive way, and everyone conducted themselves professionally. We had some excitement, some disagreement, but that's what makes a healthy committee. So I really am optimistic for the future. So thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Joseph. Really appreciate your words. Okay, Amelia?
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. This is this may be the time to just muse on some of the overarching oddities of this exercise and the poll and the statistics. When I first looked at the results of the SurveyMonkey input that people had provided, what struck me was that in aggregate, everybody agreed with all the propositions, despite the fact that we have a broad spectrum of different views on some of these details, but nothing reached the aggregate level of a 4. You know, everybody sort of agreed with all of the things that were put forward. I was trying to think of what would be something that we could all disagree on or all agree on. You know, could we all disagree that we ought to prohibit wildlife from relieving themselves in the woods? You know, what could we disagree on? But all levity aside, one of the overarching concerns that I personally have here is bicycles on narrow trails, and that was addressed in question C4, if memory serves. And even there, where we know that folks, a lot of folks in this committee are in favor of bicycle access on narrow trails, the aggregate there was about 62% agreeing with the concept of not having bikes on narrow trails. So I realized my husband knows more about statistics than I. He's a PhD materials engineer, and he says that even if you've got an aggregate result of, 2.5 or something like that, it doesn't mean that any one person voted for a 2 or a 3. They could all be 1s and 5s, and the average just turns out to be 2.5. So just an oddity, and thanks to everyone for all the work that we've done on this committee.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amelia. Okay, Scott, and then Kathy.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up to Morris's question and then some comments in the chat related to agreement of the group that more trails are needed. Based on some of the responses, I'm not convinced that the group is in agreement of that. And I think the comments in the chat are somewhat supporting that. So I think it would be helpful to poll the group with a very simple and direct question to that, just to get a feel whether we have agreement on that.
Just on whether there should be new trails at all?
Yes.
Can we do that? Can we ask that simple question? Do you think that's useful?
Well, the one answer possibility has to be, it depends.
Yeah, I think it, Scott, could you frame it in a way that we could ask? We can also, yeah,
Lou
go ahead.
Norman has a framing in the chat too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say it's important to specify what you mean when you say trail, because the statistic that I provided and reported it in this way in the beginning of this meeting is that we've only developed 15-ish miles of new narrow natural surface trails in the park district since 1995.
Yeah, and I'm talking about the scope of this group, which is the narrow natural surface trails. So that's what I'm talking about. And I guess the framing would be, do we agree that more narrow natural surface trails are needed?
I think the question, Scott, are you saying new multi-use narrow surface trails? I think you ought to be kind of direct about that.
Jim, I was direct. I'm not asking about multi-use. I'm just asking simply about trails, not specifying the particular use.
Amanda, are we able to do a poll at the last minute here to get that?
Unfortunately, you have to set up all the polls before the meeting is started.
That's right.
So
that's right.
I can't do a poll on the fly. Right. I apologize.
Well, I know it.
Could we each put our thumbs up and just have someone count them?
We could have everybody who is in favor of it raise their hand, and I can count and tell the total. Okay. So that could work.
All right, the old-fashioned hands up method.
And I mean, raising your hands with the yellow hand.
The yellow hand.
Well, okay. And I just want to make sure. Sorry, Amanda and Lou. Some people may be uncomfortable voting in public on that. I'm just throwing that out there. So we might, if that's the case, maybe we should try to do this another way.
I think that it's like being against apple pie. I don't think anyone here, judging from what they've said so far, is going to say, yes, I'm categorically opposed to all new natural surface trails. But in fact, if you raised any specific natural surface trail, they might be against it. So I don't really value this thought.
Sorry to jump in, but I have a basic question, which is, I heard Scott talk about, or Jim, I forget who, talk about narrow natural surface trails. And I don't see in the report, or I don't recall from our discussion, that we ever said that our focus was specifically narrow multi-use natural trails or narrow trails. Did I totally miss something?
No, I think that was the desire to discuss by a lot of members of the group, but it was not the original purpose it's not the purpose of this group. So.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the recommendations for design and planning of those trails, of narrow trails in particular, came out of here, but I don't think that we really, I just don't feel like I could vote on like something that I didn't realize was our primary focus, which is narrow multi-use trails.
All right, well, let me jump in here because I didn't want to get into a debate on what is meant by narrow. But in Ordinance 38, anything above 8 feet in width is considered a road, essentially. And so we're not, when we show the chart, the pie chart at the beginning of this, I tried to make it very clear that we have 1,200 miles of trails. Some are paved, some are roads, some are, the small chunk of pie that was in green are the things that we're all arguing about. We're not really talking about roads and fire roads and things, and that's not what people argue about, and so we're going to always open roads because we need to access our parks. But what we're talking about are those something more narrow than a road, and that's where all the controversy comes up, right? I'm sure and I know there are unsafe roads, and I know there are roads out there that don't have sight lines and good sight lines for things, but those carte blanche are allow multi-use. And so and we're not necessarily talking about just multi-use smaller than road trails. We're just talking about trails, in general, and but that aren't roads. I don't know if that helped or not, but or if Adela, if that didn't answer your question, please somebody ask it another way or help me out here.
All right, Simone.
Maybe it does look like Adele might have been frozen, but I guess what I'm just wondering, and I put this in the chat, but I'm wondering, I think that there are such excellent recommendations within this. Then there's recommendations that we don't all agree with. And I'm wondering if we can, for some of them, it does seem like if we could recommend a suite of strategies to be used, like based on, with the East Bay Parks kind of identifying what our priorities are, then maybe that would be helpful in some of these. For example, I hate to bring up connectivity of the Ridge Trail, but it is my job. Like connectivity is important amongst other things. And we all understand that not any of these situations will ever be looked at alone. And I guess I'm just wondering if understanding that would change the recommendations and the priorities or the agreement that we would have on different strategies. So I figured I would bring that up.
Thanks. Well, Devin is pointing out and that we are going to do an additional follow-up survey from today's meeting, so we could potentially ask that basic question as well that Scott raised as well. I am sensitive to the fact it's 12 right now. Lots of great input today, and I think before those of you who have to leave right away take off, I'd like Devin to give us a little overview of what does happen next from here. And Luana?
Yeah, I've had my hand up for a while. I'll be really quick this time.
Okay, yep, thanks.
So I guess my question one is, why are the voices in this room being elevated for the final decision? And I think that's just something to ponder about. And why aren't we also including more of the voices of the taxpayers or the public or the users? And we've gone through this whole process, we've done polls, but to really break some of these areas where there's not a consensus, why aren't we doing a statistical poll within the regions of the East Bay Regional Park, and really kind of get a litmus of how the general public across the different demographics feel about these issues, and really use that to complement what has happened in this room today, because we understand how this privileged group who feels about these different items, but I think there really needs to be, what does the public feel, and how do the people who we actually go to tax each year feel about what is happening within the park district in these lands? And that was just my comment.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. They're really good points. Okay, well, Helen, I know that you were trying to find the yellow hand. You're just getting back to your desk now. Did you have a quick comment? And then I'd like to turn it back to Devin for some comments about what comes next. Go ahead, Helen. If you can unmute. Helen was just going to say one quick thing, I think.
I just wanted to quickly ask why the recommendations are now going to the operations committee, which I understand is kind of a nuts and bolts operation, not so much policy. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe my understanding is wrong. But I thought this was going to go to the PAC and then the board. Now all of a sudden there's the operations committee. So quick answer to that maybe would be helpful.
Good, and that's dovetail on to next step. So great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Helen. And thank you, Luana, for the suggestion that we package some of these questions to the larger public in a survey form. So the intention is that we go to the PAC first with the final document. And the PAC will, of course, be a public meeting. We had intended to go November 29th, but I think we can see from the robust discussion that we've had today that that may be too premature, that there's more work to be done. Certainly there's the survey to take again for those 9 folks who couldn't take it before. And I think the wording has changed on a few of the items that some people have indicated that they might change their vote. So I think it makes sense for the survey to be reissued to everyone. If you don't want to change your vote, you wouldn't have to, but we'll capture and really advocate for those 9 people who didn't vote originally so that we have all 28 members. And just to clarify, Morris, yeah, the staff was never taking this poll. This was always just for the trail user working group members. And so after that, after the PAC, we would go to the operations committee. And luckily we've had the assistant general manager for operations, Jim O'Connor, on part of this call. So I welcome him. And he's been, kept abreast of this process over the year, because a lot of these recommendations do fall into his various divisions and the divisions of operations. And then, as you say, Helen, we would go to the board with the final document at that point as well. So there needs to be some new polling. The final document needs to be reviewed, and some more discussion needs to happen. And then we would go to the PAC. So I think what I'm suggesting is we don't go to the PAC in November. Their December meeting is a holiday meeting, so that we give ourselves some breathing room, and we go starting this whole public review process, started up in January 2022. And somewhere in there, we'll have an in-person celebration, because I recognize we've done all of this virtually, and some of you have met personally, but it's hopefully it'll be time for us to do that in person. So I'll look for some people who are interested in joining me on organizing that to form a subgroup, and we can do that together.
Right.
So does that make sense as the next steps?
Yeah, I want to just also one more time acknowledge everybody for taking the time to read through and make comments on the document itself as well, and for taking that survey. Really, really appreciate the commitment that you've had to this and all the comments made today. So Morris, I think you have another comment, and then Devin, back to you to close things out. Morris, are you available? We're about 5 minutes over time, so hopefully this is a quick comment. Nope. Still can't hear you. Maybe just type it into the chat. All right. Devin, I'm going to send it back to you.
Yeah, so we'll close out. Brian, I'll give you a chance to say some final words. So what everyone in this group can expect to see is a new link to the survey once we've edited along the lines of what we've voted on today. So the recommendations will be edited, and everyone will have a chance to consider them again. And that will become the new summary document, as well as some of the appendices that will have everyone's comments. You'll get to see the comments made. We'll redact everyone's names. And then you'll have a chance to take a look at the final document again. So whether or not we meet virtually again, we'll have to decide. But I'm just so grateful that people have been so willing to be committed to all of this discussion and been so honest and candid with us. So with that, and my thanks to you, let me hand it to Brian.
I think
Brian logged off, definitely.
Brian logged off. So
he had to go to another meeting.
Okay, Sean, do you want to have the last word?
No, I just want to thank you all, and just kind of reiterate that it's not beneficial. I don't want to rush this. So I think the intent is to get to a place where we all feel like we didn't waste our time last year and this year. And so please be reassured of that, and that we're here to listen, and we want to take in all of the diverse comments that we're hearing. So thank you all for your time. I know this is a long meeting, and I'm sure and I know we all have lives. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Happy Friday.